Hello once again, Star Wars and Unboxing fans. Welcome to another episode of Darth Tuba's Star Wars Unboxing Show. I'm your host, Darth Tuba, and today's going to be a little bit of a different episode. And instead of doing an actual unboxing, we're going to talk a little bit, maybe call it a retrospective, if you will, looking back on a very special type of Star Wars collectible. One that's kind of unique, kind of rare, and actually so rare that I honestly do not own any examples of this. So I had to kind of do an actual show where I did research and found information that I would be able to share with you in this format, which I'm going to do today. And that information has to do with a very specific type of Star Wars collectible. I guess the way you could call it the Star Wars recyclable. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean any toy that is a Star Wars toy that was recycled to be used for another brand, or that was something else that was recycled into a Star Wars toy. And I always found this to be a fascinating thing because it's a unique look into what companies were doing and how they were doing it back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, when it came to doing this. So before I get started with this, I did want to thank one gentleman by the name of Ron Salvatore, who put together this article and presentation at the Star Wars Collectors Archive. It's the swca.com, and you can find really great resources on all sorts of collecting information at that site. So I wanted to give them full credit for this. Ron put a great article together, and I'm just going to be highlighting some points from it. So again, as I started off saying, there are two types of recyclable toys. Star Wars toys that were adapted from other lines, and Star Wars toys that were later adapted into other lines. Okay, that's what we're going to focus mainly on. And by the way, I may be only scratching the surface on this, but I am hitting the bullet point items of things that are the most commonly known items that fall into one of these categories. So why do they do this? Well, let's first talk about the toys that are turned, that were adapted into Star Wars toys from other items. So why did they do this? Well, essentially, they did this because Star Wars was a movie, and at the time that movie came out in 1977, there really weren't a lot of movie tie-ins. In fact, there weren't a lot of tie-ins to movie or TV at all. There was a little bit. I mean, you do it a little bit, like, going back to the 50s when the Davy Crockett movies came out. They had the coonskin and the caps, and there were certainly some ideas. When westerns were popular, kids would like to buy cowboy hats and toy, cap guns, things of that nature. So there was tie-ins that were there, but it wasn't to the level that we know it as, when every time a big movie comes out, an entire toy aisle is filled with fill-in-the-blank, movie tie-in for 2 months, 3 months, and then it's gone. Okay, so that kind of really started with Star Wars. So Star Wars is being made, and Lucas is trying to sell all of these, to get some licensees together to help purchase product that they can sell with the name and characters and likenesses on the product to, help fund the movie. And nobody was really interested, except for some people that, puzzles and very cheaply made, easy to make items, and maybe things that are done, for all sorts of different movies and characters and things that come out around that time. Not a real huge investment. But Kenner was one company that was saying, you know what, we're going to take a chance on this. We're going to do this, okay? But here's the deal. It takes 12 to 18 months to, design a toy, mock it up, present it, pitch it, get it approved, and then make the actual models and molds, get it shipped off to wherever it gets made into mass quantities, build it, package it, ship it, and then market it and sell it. All that takes between 12 to 18 months, right? Well, they got kind of a late start, all right? And I think there was kind of a thought that it wasn't going to amount to much, and there you go. Well, then the movie came out, and we all know, boom, huge success. So then Kenner's scrambling around, and we know about all the stuff about the empty box, where you did the mail away and for Christmas, and you'd get 4 figures like in March. Okay, we know that story, and if you don't know that story, look it up. It's really funny. But what do they do right away? What could they do then and there? Like May 25th comes out, the movie's there. It doesn't really become a huge thing. I mean, the word of mouth starts, but no internet back then. And it was only in 32 theaters, and it took a few weeks for it to get into all the theaters. So it's really looking at like June and the rest of the summer that it was really popular. But there was nothing. There was nothing available, no toys available. So they had to come up with something. So what did they come up with? Well, the first was the easy stuff, puzzles. Like all the puzzles are, you take a picture, you jigsaw it, and you break it apart and put it in a box and you have the puzzle. But there was also like t-shirt transfers, things of that nature. So what else could they do? So they came up with an idea to do previously used items. Kenner was still in business for many, many, many years prior to Star Wars. So they had amassed a quantity of items that they have sold, that they designed and they built and they sold, and maybe they've taken off the shelf, or maybe they were still on the shelf, but they decided they could use them and mock them up and do something different with them and slap a Star Wars label on and make them happen. And one area that they had that was kind of, when you squint and tilt your head and look kind of funny, it's similar to Star Wars, was a TV property that they were licensing, which was the $6 Million Man. If you've ever seen the $6 Million Man, it was a great show in its time. About the Bionic Man. He had I think he was an astronaut and he was in an accident. We could rebuild him. We have the technology. So there was kind of a pseudo sci-fi esque-ness to it. But they created 12-inch figures, they created play sets, they created all sorts of stuff, okay? And one of the items that they had that they felt that they could make work was the CB radio headset receiver. It's basically like a headset with a little thing on it and had the little microphone, and it was like a CB headset, okay? So the $6 Million Man had one, and they just gave it a different paint job, and they put a Star Wars sticker on it, and it looked kind of like something, and I do mean kind of like something, like vaguely kind of like something that Luke Skywalker would have had on when he was flying his X-Wing. So they went with something like that. Okay. Other things that they did were these things called dip dots, which were these they weren't paint by numbers. They were kind of like, pictures that had colors that were already there, but you couldn't see them. But if you took your paintbrush and you painted around them, all of a sudden the colors appeared. So you could kind of watercolor all these little drawings. Well, that was pretty easy to just come up with some Star Wars drawings. So they took that idea from $6 Million Man, and probably some other properties prior to that, and they made it into the Star Wars drawings. They also had things that they did for everything, like Play-Doh. Okay, Play-Doh was pretty straightforward. What you basically had to do was create a mat, like a little vinyl, tiny little cheap vinyl mat that had a picture on it, and then you made a couple of molds, which weren't that hard to do, and maybe a little tiny version of a thing that an action figure can, that a molded action figure can sit in. So that was pretty easy. Things like Give a Show projector, which I always thought I loved. Give a Show projector was just basically like showing pictures from the movie, or even cartoons of the movie, like in a little slideshow, kind of like watching a slide projector, but it was like a toy version. So there you go. And then they had things like, the electric toothbrush from $6 Million Man. Yes, that is true. I am not making that up. They had an electric toothbrush. An electric toothbrush that was $6 Million Man, and they made it into Star Wars. So, and then another thing that was really popular in the 70s, late 70s, were the ripcord vehicles, where you would have a cord and you'd have a vehicle and you pull on it and there would be a wheel spinning, and you let it go and it can go really fast. Smash Up Derby was something that they would do. I mentioned that in previous episodes. They had these SSP, or supersonic power vans. They were like conversion vans. It's really big, like almost like the A-Team van, for those that know the A-Team van. They had vans that had a Star Wars label on them. There was of course, the villains, which was the black van, and the good guys, which was the white van, and you'd have, characters on them. I think I may have them. But I don't have, if they came out with a $6 Million Man version or anything of that nature, I don't have them. But those were things that they might not even been $6 Million Man. They might have just been standard vans, like just standard cars, like the play cars that kids could play with. So that was kind of cool. All right, and then one of the big kind of like huge things that came out and is now a very highly sought after collectible was the X-Wing Aces game, which is actually a Star Wars version of what was an earlier toy called the Aerial Aces game, which is essentially like a World War I dogfight. It had a little machine here with a little gun that you'd like kind of gun, and then there'd be a screen And it wasn't anything, I think there was like just a repeated vision of something, and you could see images come on and you try to shoot the things. I don't even know how it worked. I've seen it at toy shows and I've seen it online, and it's usually hundreds, if not thousands of dollars that people are looking for this. So, you know, I've never got it. If anybody has one, they want to send me some video or photos of it, I'd love to see that. Pretty cool. So that was like probably one of in the earlier pre-Star Wars toys of all of the stuff that was recycled into Star Wars stuff. That's probably one of the most highly sought after. Then the other kind is when Star Wars came out. Go, you know, fast forward a year and beyond, and you know, Star Wars has come out. Kenner has produced, you know, lots of vehicles and play sets and action figures. So they've got the ball rolling with Star Wars now, and they're getting ready to prep for the next movie. Well, there are other, they're looking to do other things with other, you know, licensees. So one licensee that came out was the, well, there were two. There was the Butch and Sundance, the early years. I think it was a sequel to the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid movie with Robert Redford and Paul Newman. And this was when they were younger. And I don't believe, and I think they were banking that it would be really successful, and they kind of put a whole toy line out with it. Unfortunately, it wasn't very successful, and they ended up not being able to use it very much. So they switched up the title and called it, since they had all these toys, to The Real West, and they created a few items. One of them being a Western Cafe playset, which looked specifically like, yes, the Creature Cantina playset. If there's one item, there's like one or two items in this on my list that I would love to get a hold of. That Western Cafe playset is one of them. It's just because I love the look of it. It's essentially the Creature Cantina playset, right down to all the things you could do with it. All the play features are the same. It's just it's colored a different, instead of sandy, it's colored more dark brown, and it has the backdrop that obviously doesn't have aliens and a Cantina band playing. So I would love to find that. So if anybody knows anywhere where I can get a hold of that, please leave a comment. It's called the Western Cafe playset. It looks amazing. That's like one thing I just think it would be a cool thing to add to the collection. Even though it's not Star Wars, it's kind of related. It's kind of like distant cousin. Another thing that they did was there was another thing that they had called Glamour Gals. Now this kind of ties in closer into Empire Strikes Back years, but in the Star Wars years, they created this action figure stand, and it was really cool, and it had little swivels. I actually showed you, and if you were looking at my Lighting the Collection video, I actually have that, and I showed you kind of a little sample of it. And they made that into the Glamour Gals display stand. I guess Glamour Gals, they were trying to get into a female market, young girls market with action figure collecting, so they tried this thing. And there we go. I've never seen it in the wild. I've never seen the Glamour Gals collection, so who knows. And then beyond that, before we get into Return of the Jedi, I guess the next thing would be the Han Solo 12-inch figure that came out back in the 78, 79. They also needed to use the similar molds for the Indiana Jones figure that came out in the 80s. And it was a 12-inch figure. Obviously, it was dressed completely different. And I'm not sure that the body was the same. I think there might have been some slight variations on the body. But the big thing was if you look at the faces. You look at the face of Han Solo and the face of Indiana Jones, and it's the same face. They did something a little different with the color with the eyes, and the hair color was slightly different, painted. But it's the same face. So Han Solo and Indiana Jones are definitely in the same universe when you consider the toys. Okay? So then they go on, and we get to the end. We get through Empire. We get through Return of the Jedi. And at this point, you know, Star Wars is starting to lose its popularity at that time. As I've mentioned, you know, they had some Ewok movies, and then they made a Droids and Ewoks two separate Saturday morning cartoons that had a toy line. Okay, we talked about those too. But another thing that they did that was really cool was they now get into utilizing stuff for the Ewoks. And now they had the whole set of Ewok toys that the normal 3 3/4 inch collectors collected and kids played with. But then they also came out, because there were 2 Ewok movies and the Ewok cartoon show, which lasted 2 seasons. The Ewoks had a little more life to them. So they created a kind of a preschool Ewok version of like their treehouse. It's called the Ewok Family Hut. And it was actually based loosely on the Tree Tot house, which was like a Fisher-Price style kind of thing. But Lucasfilm wouldn't allow a direct recycled version, just repainted, so they had to kind of redesign it, but it's essentially takes all of its cues from the original, so that kind of counts. All right, so then we get past Star Wars, and Star Wars now kind of dying away. You know, the Ewok movies are done, the Droids and Ewok cartoon are done, and Star Wars, we're here really hitting the dark times. There's a good 5 or 6 years that there's just nothing. So Kenner's sitting there trying to keep going with new licensees, and there was a movie that came out, or actually 2 movies that came out, that they saw an opportunity to recycle some more Star Wars product. And one of them was the movie Batman, the Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson movie Batman. And there wasn't much that was Star Wars related that transferred over. They did a lot of new things. They had a Batmobile and a couple of other vehicles and toys and things. But one thing that they took was the Stormtrooper rifle. The Stormtrooper rifle, which back then the Stormtrooper rifle looked a lot like the Stormtrooper rifle, colored gray, dark gray, wasn't colored orange or white or weird colors now. And they made it into the Batman Sonic Neutralizer. Sorry, the Batman Sonic Neutralizer. So that was kind of cool to see that. And then another movie came out, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Now this was a really interesting movie, and I gotta say, I rewatched it recently, and it's actually kind of fun. I mean, I really enjoyed it. It's got a lot of action in it. It's got a great score. I think it's I want to say it's Hans Zimmer, but I have to double check that. Might not be Hans Zimmer. No, I think actually he did Robin Hood Men in Tights, Mel Brooks. Another great film, but I forget who it is, but I remember the music's really cool, and I remember that it had an interesting cast. Like Christian Slater was in it, Kevin Costner, and he played Robin Hood, didn't speak with an English accent, which was weird because everybody else was speaking in accents except for him and Christian Slater. But just about everybody else spoke with an accent. Oh, Alan Rickman, kind of before we knew who Alan Rickman was. I mean, I think he might have just done Die Hard, so he was just on the air, but he was hysterical in it. He was Sheriff of Nottingham or whatever. Just amazing. Just amazing. So much fun. And they came out with a toy line. And the toy line took a lot of cues and basically toy molds from Star Wars, specifically anything related to Ewoks. There was the Ewok Village, which became Sherwood Forest. There was the Battle Wagon, which became the Robin Hood Battle Wagon. It was basically the same thing. There was the Gamorrean Guard, which became Friar Tuck. Go figure. So there was a couple. I think they also utilized things like the catapult, things of that nature. So there was a couple of cool things that they used. And then the only other thing that we've been able to find is back to that Butch and Sundance, the early years. I think there was a Sundance Kid figure that looked like they stole a lot of Luke's look from it. I'll put putting images up as this go. You be the judge, okay? So that's kind of where it went. I haven't really seen too much about it in more recent years. With there have been tons, and I mean tons, of toys created since then. And from 94, 95 till now, we're talking 25 years plus. And they had all the toys from Episode 1, Episode 2, Episode 3, Clone Wars, which lasted for years, the new sequel trilogy, and all the stuff they remade from the original trilogy. Not just stuff that they re-released again. I mean, yes, you can count that when they first started releasing the figures in the mid-90s, they just took the molds of the X-Wing, of the TIE Fighter, of the Millennium Falcon, of the speeder bike, of the AT-ST, they took them all, and of the AT-AT, they took a ton of stuff and they just kind of re-released it. Slapped a better coat of paint, some better play apps in there, and usually some electronics. So they recycled Star Wars with Star Wars, but I don't know if that really counts. And then since then, I haven't seen them utilize a lot of it. But I got to be honest with you, I don't really follow the toy market outside of Star Wars. So maybe you might have seen, if you're a toy collector from the 90s or to 2000s, and you have, that there's some toys that were made for Star Wars initially, whether it be Star Wars, prequel movies, Clone Wars, whatever. And those toys ended up being reused and reshaped somewhat for another line of toys, let me know. Leave a comment. I'd be really interested to hear about that. So that's going to do it for this week's episode. A little bit different. I am going to be doing a lot of unboxing, but I also, that was just something that was interesting to me that I wanted to talk about because I really thought it was interesting. And I'm kind of shocked that these toy companies don't use this even more. Maybe they feel like, we get it from Star Wars. How many Stormtroopers, how many Luke Skywalkers, Han Solos, Darth Vader figures have been released over and over again that are virtually the same figure with just some subtle, slight differences. I've seen that so much that I actually unloaded a lot of my collection. I'm talking on the newer stuff. But even back in the vintage days, they never had. There was only one Luke from Tatooine. That was it, one, and they released it on 3 different cards: Star Wars, Empire, Jedi. Oh, maybe 4 if you count. I don't know if they relisted it on Power of the Force, but there you go. So it's kind of interesting to see. So anyway, leave some comments, like, subscribe, share, hit the notification button. I would say, subscriber numbers are great. They continue to grow. Welcome to all of our new subscribers. Check out all my videos, guys. Go back, check them all out. Go back to the beginning. Go to my playlist and just hit them and play them all. You'll really enjoy them. I think there's a lot of fun stuff in there. And again, for those that are new, this is just a fun atmosphere where I just try to, put a positive spin on all the toys that have come out, new, old. I do mostly unboxing, but I do a lot of other stuff as well. So thank you so much for watching. Till next time, may the Force be with you.